To ditch this mic that I'm wearing. Don't know why that's not working. I'm now on the laptop mic, which you seem to be able to hear me on, so apologies. It's not going to be as good. It now looks like we've got, oh my god, internet issues as well. This is an absolute nightmare. Alright, I think we might be good. Really sorry, really sorry. I hate it when stuff like this doesn't work, because I do try so hard to make this work, I promise you. I hate it when things fail. Right, so the laptop mic is on. You might get a bit of background noise from the sound of the fan, but there's not a lot I can do about that right now. So we'll crack on anyway. Really appreciate it if you've actually stayed with me through all of this, because I would not blame anyone who's decided to ditch it and go and watch something else. We'll stick with this mic. It may not be the best sound, something at least. So what we're going to do is start with this question of, will Sebastian Vettel play nicely at Ferrari for the remainder of his time at Ferrari in the 2020 season? Will he play the team game? Will he go off on his own? Will he do what he wants to do? Will he want to make a point? Will he want to prove to Ferrari that they've made the wrong decision? And will he want to prove to Charles Leclerc that he's a four-time world champion and he deserves the respect that a four-time world champion deserves? That's my question that I'm going to throw back to you. I'm going to start by saying that my personal feeling is, I do think it will depend, obviously, how results go. Sebastian has been not great under pressure on the last few years, has he? So when things haven't gotten that well for him, he's often caved. And that means that he's caved on the racetrack, he's made mistakes on the racetrack, but you also hear it in the tone of his voice. You can hear him getting frustrated. You can hear him getting angry with himself when he starts to shout at the team. His post-rations haven't been good either. But underneath all of that, isn't it, is a hugely experienced, hugely talented still four-time world champion. So I think the answer to that question, in my view, that I've put into the title of this video, is it will very much depend how the results go. If it starts to go well, if he gets off on the right foot, absolutely he'll puff his chest out and he'll be the Sebastian Vettel that is a four-time world champion and will want to go out on a high. And I think if he's retiring from the sport, you know, this will now be about how people remember him. This will be about the legacy that he's left. Yeah, 4 world titles is an amazing legacy, but that was quite a long time ago, and people tend to remember the most recent thing. So if 2020 if this is his last time in a Formula 1 car, and only he will probably know that right now, I can see him rising above all of this, wanting to go out in the right way, wanting people to remember him in the right way, wanting to command respect from the fans, from the team, from his teammate, and from the other drivers on the grid as well. If he goes out and starts to get a bit petulant on occasions and starts to see some of those moments that we've seen, you know, come in recent times, he's not going to go out of this sport on a high. He's not going to get the celebration towards retirement that he probably does deserve. So my feeling is that he will be able to rise up and stay above it all, unless results start to really go against him, unless Charles Leclerc starts to continuously beat him and the team are asking him to play second fiddle. Of course, I want to know what you think, so do start firing in your comments on all of this. I can see them firing in right now. I'll come to those in a moment. I think results will play a huge part, and in a second, I showed you it last night. It's obviously moved on. The poll that I put on YouTube earlier on, or yesterday earlier on, had some quite astounding results in my view. Let's just see what some of you are saying here. Lots of you saying, well, you can't force him to listen to team orders, says Nexus ADR. What can you do? I mean, that's absolutely true. If he decides he's not going to listen to team orders and do his own thing, what can Ferrari do? I honestly don't think it will get to that point. But look, they've sacked him, he's leaving. What more can they do? I saw some people saying, would they even offload him before the season finishes? Maybe even before the season starts, given that we're in this weird 2020 season. So I think that's highly unlikely, because I think Seb does deserve a lot more respect than that. But let's see how things go. Multi-21 Seb, says Simon Moroschek. Yeah, I mean, that's one of those, exactly one of those moments, isn't it? That's one of the things that if that's the last kind of moment that he goes out of this sport with, if indeed he is leaving the sport at the end of this season, that won't be a good legacy. It won't be a sort of good parting gift to Formula 1 or to Formula 1 fans, would it? Let's hope Vettel wins first, says Gerben Anihui. Well, let's face it, there is an outside possibility he could still win the championship. That would be the ultimate throwing something back in Ferrari's face. I think it's unlikely given the performance we saw in pre-season testing. They didn't seem to have a car that looked capable of challenging the Mercedes, maybe even the Red Bull, and maybe even again. Oh, we're back. Okay, apologies. You probably just heard me swearing there because on my you're a bit behind me, but my screen just went black for a second. Right, we'll continue. Ferrari they're assessing an idea of going to Indianapolis with the team to perhaps utilise some of the extra workforce they may have or they may no longer need with Formula One, some of the extra budget they might be cutting when the budget cap kicks in. I'm not sure if it'll happen or not, and I really don't think that Sebastian will go with Ferrari because I personally think the love has been lost between the two. Ferrari and Sebastian, let's face it, Ferrari have essentially decided they no longer want Sebastian in their team. And that's got to hurt Sebastian, so I can't see that relationship being prolonged. If you read in between the lines of the statement they released, it wasn't a good one, was it? It wasn't all plain sailing on either side. It wasn't both sides showing absolute love and respect for each other. Yes, there was some wording around that. I don't think any of us felt that they meant it, really. So I'm not sure that I could see him going on to do anything else with Ferrari if that's the case. Let me see. Someone says turn the res down to 720. I can't do that right now, but hopefully you've got me back because it says on my stream that you're back. Not... fucking hell. Oh, guys, I'm really sorry. This is not happening again, is it? I'll keep going because it says on my end that it's working, but I'm not sure if it is or not. Right, anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the poll that I was talking about. This was the poll that I asked you lot yesterday. Now, a lot more people have taken part since then. 1,200 people. 70% of people saying that they don't think Sebastian Vettel will play nicely at Ferrari in the remainder of this year. I think that's a really interesting number. It's huge. 70% of people don't believe Sebastian can manage to play nicely if indeed we go racing again in 2020. So that's amazing, isn't it? That's the perception that fans, and you're a general cross-section of fans, have of this four-time world champion of Sebastian Vettel, that he won't be able to play the team game even if this is his final year with the team. I mean, that's staggering, isn't it? That perception has come from the things that he's done. He's created that perception, so he can't necessarily argue with it. So I think it's a really interesting. That's exactly what I'm talking about. His actions over the last few years, his mistakes, his multi-21, things like that have created a perception where you guys, the Formula One fan base, no longer think he'll be able to hold it down in his final season with the team and play nicely. I think that's really interesting. Let's see what you say. If Seb goes to Marc, what does that mean for George Russell? I can't see Sebastian Vettel going to Mercedes. And I may live to regret saying this, but there's no way I can see that happening. I get that there's a marketing benefit to Mercedes having a German driver. But as far as I can see, that's pretty much the only benefit they get. First of all, I can't see why Seb would want to go and put himself up against Lewis in Lewis's own team. Let's make that clear. Why would he want to do that? And secondly, you know, Mercedes have got a sort of perfect scenario right now with Lewis and with Valtteri Bottas. They don't ruffle each other's feathers. They've got championships coming out of their ears. Lewis will take the Drivers' World Championship. That's what Mercedes want. Let's make no bones about this. Mercedes will want to be the team that powers a 7th and potentially an 8th time World Drivers' Championship. They're not going to want to miss out on that everlasting opportunity that provides. Upsetting the apple cart has the potential to destabilise that winning formula that they've got right now. Now, I'm not saying that they will definitely stick with Bottas, because I think George Russell is definitely on his way up into the main team to potentially take over from Lewis in the long run. But I can't see why Sebastian, or why they would want Sebastian in there. Not because I think he'd be a genuine threat to Lewis, but more because they've been fighting him over the last few years and seen him cave in under pressure. They have beaten him hands down over and over and again. And I know that a lot of that has been down to Ferrari, but a lot of it has also been down to Seb. Why would they want to bring that into the Mercedes family? I just don't see it happening. So, I know that it's been talked about all over the media, and maybe the marketing aspect will be strong enough that the board at Mercedes might say we want another German driver in the team. But personally, it makes no sense to me. I mean, let me know what you think on that one. Bottas is looking around. Is he maybe knowing something, says Juan Lube. I mean, look, maybe. But I don't think necessarily that's going to be making way for Seb. I think it could be that they're starting to think about Lewis. Lewis may have 2 years left, maybe in him. He's already started making noises about potential post-F1 life. So he's not going to be around forever. So they need to start building, if they are in F1 for the long term, they need to start building a follow-on plan. And in my mind, that's probably centred around George Russell. So not to move on Bottas, bring Russell up to the team to work alongside Lewis with a view to eventually swapping over. I'm totally speculating here, but that's a plausible possibility in my mind. Exactly, says Shane Dunn. Why bring in the guy who you keep beating? Couldn't agree more. Vettel's car will break down every single race in 2020, says Teamwork F1. Look, Ferrari need him to do well because they need the results. They need to have success in the racetrack. They're not going to hamper their own driver. They may start to put things all in line with Charles Leclerc perhaps, but they're certainly not going to hamper one of their drivers, and certainly not by making his car break down. Right, I think what we'll do is we will move on to the next question, because what I've got here is, that was the one for Sarah Darts, was that question. So thank you, Sarah. Appreciate that one. This next one comes from Carl Harvey. And Carl says, do you think there's a chance of a British GP despite the latest quarantine rules? Loving these live streams. Well, you may not be loving it after tonight and all these technical setbacks. I really do apologise. I feel so bad. Thanks very much though, and thanks for the question. Do you think there's a chance of a British Grand Prix despite the latest quarantine rules? So for those who don't know, the UK government are imposing, I think it's from the 8th of June, a 14-day quarantine for anybody coming into the UK by air. Now, 7 of the Formula 1 teams are based in the UK. Some of the drivers are. Some of the suppliers, of course, are as well. Now, that has impacts, first of all, on the British Grand Prix, because, of course, the whole Formula 1 world needs to descend on the UK for a British Grand Prix. So there's the first thing. If you're going to have to quarantine everybody for 14 days before a British Grand Prix, that doesn't work with the current schedule that they've laid out, starting in Austria. So that's one thing. The other thing is, and somebody said to me the other day, why couldn't you start the season in Britain and bring everybody in to the UK to start the season there and then roll on to other places afterwards? Well, you've still got to bring in at least 3 teams and Pirelli and all of these other people that are based outside of the UK who would still have to come in 14 days early in quarantine. So there are still issues around that. Perhaps the bigger issue that's been thrown to light now, and this could jeopardise not only the British Grand Prix, but potentially the season, and that may sound extreme, but these are genuine questions now. If everybody's got to leave the UK to go off racing, what happens when they want to come back? Now, everybody will be saying, well, you just get everybody to stay away and move around in this bubble, and that's kind of what we're looking at doing for the first set of European races. But it means staying away from home for quite a long period of time. Now, I'm sure that most people would be willing to make a number of sacrifices to enable that to happen, given that we've all been at home for so long now. So it's not an issue if it's 6 weeks, maybe, if it's maybe even a little bit longer than that. But you get much longer than that, and I think it starts to become really quite difficult for people who are leaving their families, leaving their kids, leaving their loved ones behind. Those people who are being left behind, watching their loved ones go off into this so-called protected bubble that's F1, maybe who they won't see again for another 2 months or whatever. That then becomes a bit tricky. The human aspect of asking people to leave home for that amount of time becomes a little bit more challenging, because normally, of course, teams would come back in races, which we wouldn't be able to do in a 14-day quarantine. So anyway, that's my thoughts on it. I don't think at the moment we're going to get a British Grand Prix in its original slot. It may be possible that might be able to happen later at the end of a European season, by which time, of course, the rules governing quarantine in the UK may well have changed. what's happening at the moment is Italy are about to unlock, or in fact have unlocked their borders, haven't they? Almost opened everything now to anybody, and all of the other European countries are now looking at that and going, well, hang on, if anybody can go in and out of Italy whenever they want now, they're going to get all the tourism. And I think a lot of the other European countries and nations are starting to look at that, thinking, well, actually, you know, that's quite a big slice of the pie. We might need to start doing the same, and you might find that some of these borders start falling in like a set of dominoes quite quickly, and the UK may well be part of that. So anything could change over time, but I think to get a British Grand Prix in its original slot is going to be really tricky. Josh Smith says, rumours are Silverstone would push back to August. Exactly, yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. But that's total speculation, of course, because we can still only have a British Grand Prix in August if we've got a 2-week gap before it to be able to quarantine, which seems unlikely with the compressed calendar we're trying to achieve, or if the rules have changed. So what they are trying to do is keep options open, hoping things are relaxed by then, and maybe we'll be okay. What will happen if someone gets the virus halfway through the season and the team pulls out again, says Blue August. Well, this is the big unknown. F1 are putting facilities in place, medical facilities, to be able to deal with that kind of scenario, so that it may not have the same effect that it had back early in Australia, where there was very little known about it. There was very little preparation, very little medical preparation to be able to deal with a case like that. Now we know a lot more about it. They are trying to put, you know, standalone facilities in place that if we get a case or a selection of cases, they can quarantine those people within that space and deal with it the best they can to hopefully allow the events to continue. That's the way they're talking right now. I've got my own concerns about whether I would be comfortable putting myself and whether my family would be comfortable putting me into that kind of environment, but I don't know. I don't know how open to me, but I do speak to a lot of people, you know, still at the teams, my friends, who some of them are raising concerns about that and have some issues around it. So who knows to that one? Quarantine at the track. Absolutely, that's what it will be. Quarantine at the track, Sandy Barnes says. That is exactly the plan. So everybody will turn up at a circuit or at an event, travel to the event together, be quarantined together, move around together, and stay in this quarantined bubble. If you mean quarantine at the track for the British Grand Prix, it's fine, but it's a 2-week quarantine. There's no 2-week gaps in the calendar that F1 are presenting right now, because there isn't time to fit a 2-week gap in. We're trying to cram as many races in as possible. Do F1 teams have the capacity to have 2 teams of engineers participating in alternating races per team? Says Jose Summit. And lots of people have said that to me as well. And the answer is no, they don't. It's not that if that was the only way to do it, we couldn't manage it, because I'm sure with reduced numbers, you might be able to come up with something where you could bring people out the factory to take over some of these roles. But it would be a huge compromise. It would be a huge risk in some areas, because if you're not fully trained and experienced and up to speed in the right areas, then, you know, people doing these jobs in Formula One are the best, the very best in their field at whatever it is they do. So you can't just bring in a standby, a replacement, because there aren't many standbys and replacements. So that's not an easy solution, I'm afraid. Right, Shane Dunn says, come on guys, keep it F1, not politics. Yeah, fair point, Shane. Let's stay away from the politics. Let's keep it F1. So there you go. I think we still, I wouldn't write off the British Grand Prix, but I think it's looking likely for it to happen in the current slot that it was due to take part in at the moment. So let's move on to the next question, which comes from Carlos Frade. Carlos says, congratulations for the wonderful videos. Thank you. I especially like the Tales from the Treehouse. Thanks very much. He said, speaking of stupid rules, which one did you hate the most? I hated groove tyres. Now this question comes from, you may not have seen it, a video I did recently, one of my Tales from the Treehouse videos, where we were talking about the idea where in 2005 we weren't allowed to change tyres in pit stops. So one set of tyres had to do the whole event, qualifying and the race. Crazy, stupid rule, and yes, I hated that. I also hated groove tyres. I have thought about this one though, and I'd love you to know, love to hear what you think, because there have been so many of these crazy, stupid rules throughout Formula One's history. The one that I thought was most crazy and stupid, up with our race fuel on qualifying day, and then in the first part of qualifying, just run around as many laps as we could, burning off that fuel to make the car as light as possible. It was so stupid on so many levels. It wasn't entertaining for the fans at all. It sent all the wrong messages about environmentalism, where we were literally just trying to burn through as much fuel as we could for no reason other than to burn through it and get rid of it. And it added nothing to the race weekend. So unsurprisingly, that rule didn't last very long. But I'd love to know what you think on that. The banning of refuelling has been terrible for the car weights and tactics, says Simon Stansfield. My feeling on refuelling is that we shouldn't bring it back. I didn't like refuelling. I know it adds some strategy, but it does force all of the overtakes into the pit lane. And it's all about you make your strategic pit stop for fuel, bearing in mind what everyone else is doing. Your race strategy all centres around your refuelling. And it means there's almost no benefit in trying to push to overtake on the racetrack, because you know you can do it in the pit lane. And I think that's detrimental to the sport. So personally, I didn't like that. Grooves and burns, no good. Immortal Duke, yeah. Good way of putting it. Grooves and burns. No good. Didn't like either. Wasn't keen on lap 1 qualifying. Neither was DC. Yeah, ain't done. We had a few qualifying formats that haven't worked. Well, double points, there's another one. No, it's not qualifying, but that's one I hated. There was the aggregate qualifying. Who remembers that? Where you had to do 2 separate laps, one on your race fuel, one on low fuel, and then they added the times together. I mean, who thought that up? Didn't like the eliminator qualifying, says Dave the Fish. Yeah, I agree. Do you know what? I liked qualifying back in the day when we had, I think we used to get 12 minutes, was it? And we just used to be able to do, or 12 laps. You could do as, you sat in the garage and you waited to the right moment, you went out and did your blistering lap. I used to quite enjoy that, into a head right at the end. But I also enjoy qualifying as it is right now. I don't think there's anything wrong with the way the qualifying format is today, generally. I actually quite like it. Points for overtakes. Stupid rule. There we go. Okay, let's just break from this one for a moment. Let me turn that off, because Donkey Donga says, what's happening at McLaren's? And I want to address this. I didn't bring it up in one of my questions because I did all the prep for this yesterday before this has happened. What's happening at McLaren? This comes from, and we'll get your comments on this, of course, this comes from the news today that they are going to offload staff. 1,200 staff across the group. I think around about 70 from the F1 operation. Serious numbers, really significant cutbacks in terms of people, human cutbacks. Perhaps inevitable. Maybe it's not the biggest surprise given what's gone on. And my other thought on this is that I don't think they're going to be the only team to do it. I think McLaren may well be the first team to announce that they're going to have job losses, but I don't think they'll be the last. They're going through really tough times right now. And don't forget, McLaren's core business, if you like, in their road car business, is also being massively hit right now, as well as the F1 side. No one's buying supercars, and the team's not going racing, and therefore bringing in no income. So really, really tough times for McLaren as a business to go through right now, but it is for everybody. There'll be lots of other teams and organisations in very similar situations. So it's very sad. I have no further information than what's been reported today. I did know that this was sort of coming, but I didn't know the scale of it. And it's very sad. At the end of the day, each one of those numbers is a human. Someone who is going to lose their job, and at a time like this it's probably going to be really hard to find another job, because there's not going to be many operations that are going to be hiring people in this period of time, certainly not with the specialist skills that those have working for an operation like McLaren. So really tough times. As I say, it says there it was expected, but really sad days, absolutely. McLaren was struggling to sell road cars even before the coronavirus. Well, they have had some challenging times at McLaren in terms of finance. But actually the organisation was not in bad health, I don't think, as far as I'm aware. The road cars haven't done as well as they hoped, says Steve Cole, 1984. I mean, yeah, there have been issues. At times, the road car business has been a bit like this. They've had some low spots, but they're one of those industries that's massively hit when there's a financial downturn. Dean Arnold says, are they preparing for the budget cuts? Well, it's not in response to the budget cuts. The budget cap doesn't kick in, of course, till January next year. And McLaren are one of these teams that are already operating pretty much at the budget cap. So they're one of the teams that don't have to make any sacrifices because of the budget cap in that sense. So it's not related to that. It's more related to the financial situation the company's in as a whole, the group is in. I read the job losses are because of the cost cap, not the virus, says Jeff Macy. Well, look, I think there's going to be a huge amount of spin put on this because nobody wants to admit their company might be struggling. But the fact is, and I'm no expert in the financial matters of McLaren, let's face it. But the budget cap isn't going to hit McLaren as hard as it will hit somebody like Ferrari, who have to bring their budget right down. McLaren were already operating at somewhere around the £150 million dollars a season mark, so somewhere close. So if they have to make some job losses as a result of the budget cap, I think that will be minimal numbers. I think what they're really suffering with, like everyone else, as I say, is just a big financial hit generally. Renee Pedersen says, "Hi Mark, what's your take on the dismissal of Daniel Abt from Audi in Formulary?" Renee Pedersen, thank you. I did want to address this tonight as well, because you may well have seen this. This was Formulary's version of their virtual races, happened on Saturday, and Daniel Abt, the Audi driver, had a stand-in. He had a young sim racer in his seat, racing virtually in place of him, with his face obscured by the microphone on his Twitch stream, so you couldn't really see. And Daniel, who's not been particularly competitive in the online sim races for Formulary, perhaps because he hasn't taken it that seriously, because it is a bit of fun, suddenly was right up there and right at the top of the mix. He got busted, he got found out, it's suddenly blown up into this huge deal. He got fined €10,000, I think it was, to give to charity, eliminated of course from the race. But today Audi have cut all ties with him. It's now taken his job. He's lost his contract at Audi as a factory driver. Thoughts on that? It was very difficult for Audi not to do that. Now, I just watched Daniel Abt's response. He did a YouTube video response earlier. I just watched it before I came on air now. He says, and I actually believe him, knowing Daniel as I do, he's a joker. He's always larking around. He says that he doesn't take this stuff very seriously. He always treats it as a bit of fun. And if you look at the races, it's always been a bit like that. They're not serious like the F1 races are serious, and even those are not that serious. He says he did this as a joke. He openly talked about it on his Twitch last week, saying to one of these young sim racers that he was driving against, "You should come and take my place." He had planned to film it all, do a YouTube video after the event and unravel it and unveil it. So it was always a planned thing. It wasn't trying to cheat as such. He was trying to buck the system, have a bit of a laugh and catch everybody out, so he says. But if you're Audi, your driver has effectively cheated in a sanctioned Formulary race where he was representing the brand of Audi and all the partners that go along with that. So how could they just, what do you think? Just a game? Or when it's in this public platform, sponsored and partnered with major brands, do you have to take it a lot more seriously? Personally, I think it's a really grey area. I do believe him that he wasn't trying to cheat. I do believe that he was just having a bit of a laugh with it. But he has to realise that he was representing some fairly major participants in this, not even for a second, forgetting that he's also trying to entertain fans. Perhaps it's a bit more serious than he first thought. Audi themselves cheated the whole world with Dieselgate, a bunch of hypocrites, says F1 Quiz. I don't know what to say with that. Fair play. Let me see. Just a game, says Gavin Harris. He should have asked the team beforehand, says Adam Nagy. Yeah, I mean, that's a fair point. I'm sure the team would have said no because it reflects badly on Audi, and that's the whole point here. It reflected badly on Audi. It was a sanctioned race, says Clanson. Yeah, absolutely. It's a shame for people to lose their drives from esports, says Josh Smith. Gust says, penalty, yes, losing your job, a bit hard. My feeling is I agree with you. I think losing his job is pretty harsh on Daniel. He's a lovely guy. He's a proper joker. He's the joker in the pack in the Formulary paddock. He's very active on YouTube and on social media. And I believe him when he says he was trying to make some interesting, funny content around this because it's not a very serious event. but I think he's perhaps underestimated the seriousness of it. Anyway, that's that one. I wanted to touch on it, but yes, a lot of you saying it sounds a bit of a laugh, but he is representing Audi, says Dave Bonner. I think that's the overriding factor here, isn't it? As soon as he's representing a major brand, you have to start taking it seriously. Ryan Bird says Vettel to replace Abt in Formulary. How about that? I honestly can't see Sebastian Vettel going to Formulary. I think it's the last place he would want to end up. He's all about the screaming V10s and V12s, isn't he? Doesn't want to go to anything more quiet than we've got right now. Right, let us move on to the next question, because that one comes from Robert. Hang on, where is it? Robert Milligan. Does it? No, it doesn't. It comes from Robert Milligan. There we go. Robert Milligan says, Mark, another great story. But what I would like to know was, what was it like to work for Ron Dennis? Was he as ruthless as people say, or was he a good boss? Well, the truth is, Robert, he was both of those things. He was ruthless, and that's why he was so successful. He was utterly ruthless. He had a set of standards that were way higher than anybody could literally achieve. He was a perfectionist, the greatest perfectionist I've ever known. He had OCD, undoubtedly. You know, he would walk around that factory and he would spot something out of place that, I mean, nobody, even if they were looking for it, could spot. In that sense, he was ruthless because he expected everybody to have that same level of OCD that he had. We probably had some of it by the time we all left working from Mclaren or working from him, but we didn't have that in the beginning. So absolutely ruthless. His expectations were unachievable, but that's also what made him so successful. And whilst that was really difficult to work for at times under those conditions, I now step away and I look back and I think that's why he was so great. And now I see the bigger picture. I see why we at McLaren over those years were so successful. And it was because of that attention to detail that he instilled in everybody. So yes, absolutely ruthless, but also he was a brilliant boss to work for because he taught me so much, not just about my job at McLaren and working in Formula One, but about my life. My life now is enriched through having worked for Ron. You know, because of, it's going to sound funny, I was going to say because my attention to detail has now gone up, and yet this stream has been falling apart since I started it. Believe me, there was some attention to detail in this before I started. But he was both brilliant in that way, in that sense that he's helped me ruthless. Because we knew what he expected, which was nothing short of perfection, everybody was always trying to attain that level. Now that can come with some downsides because it's not possible to be perfect, and yet he thought it probably should be. And so that could cause friction. It can cause problems with certain types of people. So he wasn't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but ruthless and a brilliant boss is what I would say. Let's see what you're saying on this one. He was passionate about F1, and I like that the most, says Max Slater. Yeah, very passionate about F1, very passionate about McLaren. Because he was there pretty much from the beginning. He built the team and the group, not just the team, the organisation into what it is today. He's passionate about that, way more so than anybody who can come in as an investor or someone who can come in, be brought in to run the team. He's the guy who had more passion than anybody else. Now that doesn't mean that Zach Brown or anyone else, isn't doing a great job. He is doing a great job, and he will, I'm sure, will continue to do a great job. But Ron had a passion that I don't think you can replace. Ron helps many people with his teachings, even to me, and I teach his way to bring success, says Teamwork F1. Absolutely. What else have we got here? The Sir Alex Ferguson of F1 then, says DJ Burt. Very similar in many ways. Yeah, he could absolutely give the hairdryer treatment to somebody if he needed to. But he was also inspirational in that way. So yeah, Alex Ferguson, there's a lot of differences between the two, but definite similarities as well. Phil Reeve, attention to detail, Mark, it's the only way. I do feel, and I honestly believe that is how we become successful in anything we do, is through attention to detail. Even if it's the tiniest things, if it's making your dinner and you want it to be the best dinner you can, it comes from attention to detail. you know, when it came to pit stops, it was about attention to detail, equipment, the practice, the training, you know, the looking after yourself, the being ready, the being prepared. Everything boils down to attention to detail, and I do carry that all the way through. Right, let me see, who else have we got here? I'm going to switch to the next question. Thank you very much for that one. But we're going to go on, and we're going to go to this one from Rohan B. Nair, who says, which one is the car much shallower than that of the Red Bull underneath, which has a much greater ride height at the rear of the car, much lower at the front? Which is better? Really difficult question to answer. On one hand, you can look at Mercedes and say, well, they've won everything in the hybrid era, so surely that's got to be better. Yet half the grid, if not more, are moving towards the Red Bull style high rake system. So why would they do that? Well, the really simplified version, and it is way more complex than this, is that the Mercedes version of that lower rake on their car is much more about having a system that is easier to work with. And what I mean by that is it provides a much more stable aero platform than the Red Bull system does down below. The Red Bull system, potentially with the high rake, potentially offers greater downforce and greater drivability through certain corners, greater downforce in certain situations. Raising the rear of the car up and effectively then lowering the front brings exaggerates the effect of the diffuser of the underbody of the car, which generates a huge amount of downforce. It also tips the front wing much closer to the ground, which brings it into much more of a ground effect itself, which can make the front wing work a lot more effectively as well. The problem though is it's much more sensitive to ride height. And when you've got a front wing operating in ground effect and it's going over curbs or going over bumps, or your ride height's constantly changing with braking and acceleration and different speeds, that's a much harder thing to control, that aero platform. Your aero balance can be constantly moving forward and back if you don't get that right. Now Red Bull have kind of led the way on this, and they've been very clever about the way they've managed to achieve that. Some of it may have been through some slightly dubious flexi components on the front end, but they've managed to make that work and pursued that concept. Others have now followed, because in the wind tunnel it definitely offers greater potential. Mercedes have stuck with what they've got, partly because it's what they've got and it's what they know. They're very comfortable with that solution. You know, it may not offer the overall maximum downforce level that the other system might do, but it's a much more stable platform. It can offer that greater downforce on a much wider spectrum and be less susceptible to this aero balance shifting around when you don't want it to. So that's the basic theory. And also, of course, we're now coming towards the end of these cars. We were due to have this as the last year of this type of car, so it would have made very little sense for Mercedes to switch to a very different, like a high rate concept now, which might have taken some learning before they fully got on top of it. So that's why they've got what they know and they've decided to stick with it. But those are the basic differences between the two concepts. So it's not really as simple as saying one's better than the other. One only works with the overall design concept of the car that you're designing around it. So either can work very well, and you just got to look at the results that Mercedes have had to say that that's a testament to that. They've won many championships with that style of car. Sandy Barnes says, how will the new Aero ground effects regs in 2022 affect Rake? So that's a good question, and I'm not entirely sure yet. Of course, what happens is with the Rake is that what we're doing with Rake is we're sort of expanding that expansion chamber that is the diffuser by tipping the whole car up, so making the whole underbody an expansion chamber for the airflow to expand into and generate downforce that way. In 2022, we're going to have these Venturi tunnels that are designed into the underside of the car. So that aero balance is naturally going to move further back anyway, because those Venturi tunnels are further back than currently. We have the centre of pressure, so i.e. the point where maximum downforce is generated underneath the floor, is currently at that point where the floor is at its lowest, at the front of the floor, the front of the T-tray part, where it's narrow, the gap's narrowest to the floor. That's where the airflow is accelerated to its greatest level through that tiny gap, and then it expands out through the expansion chamber, through the diffuser and out towards the back of the car. From the floor is much further forward now than it will be in 2022 when we have a very different shaped underfloor. So the truth is, I don't know exactly how that's going to play out in terms of Aero Rake yet. I'm not sure how the teams are looking at that, but I would imagine we certainly won't get an Aero Rake like we have today, because I don't think it will bring the same benefits. Let me see. What's the most difficult aero part to make in F1, says Sven Snock. The most difficult aero part to make. Normally, in terms of complexity of actual manufacture, it's always the parts have to be crash tested, like a nose cone. Is incredibly difficult because to manufacture a component to get the right amount of crumple zone, the right amount of energy absorption, but only just, because you don't want to add any more weight than you need, that's the real difficult balance to find. Weight is obviously a very detrimental element to a Formula 1 car, but we need to have passed these stringent crash tests. So I would say that's the most complex in terms of manufacturing to make. Of course, in terms of design, everything else is really complicated, because it every single piece, whether it's a tiny flick up on the side of the bodywork, has to be done as close to perfection as it can be done. So there's none of these parts that are 5-minute parts. They all get the same care and attention as a front wing does, or as a floor does, whether it's a flick up on the side of a brake duct or anything else. Right, I'll keep it going if you guys are happy to continue. I don't know how many of you are still here. Let's have a little look. 165 it says there. Okay, I'm not surprised that a lot of people have disappeared, but I really appreciate you all hanging around. That's very kind of you, with the mess that this one started as. Let's get another question in before we start to think about wrapping this up. Let me see. Let's quickly see this one. Jean Cartier, or Jean Cartier, says, Mark, do you think James Key is the right man for McLaren? I think James Key's a really excellent appointment. I think he's really good. I don't know him on a personal level. I've never worked with him. So that makes a huge difference when you're understanding of what they're actually like. But I do think he's very well, highly regarded, very well respected within the Formula 1 community. And that normally tells you a lot. When his peers are saying great things about him, that tells you that he's a great person to work for. What will be interesting is to see how he comes in and he's part of the organisation, because that's partly what his job is. It's not just about designing a car anymore. It's about running a team of designers, and that's a huge element to the job that I don't really know too much about him with in that sense. 750 people say, okay, thank you. I don't know where I got that from then. My huge delay on my stream, but there you go. 750. Thanks very much for joining. I appreciate it. Right, let me see. Right, yeah, thank you. We're all still here. Thank you. Honestly, I really appreciate you all still being here, because I know that I'd have been very impatient if I was watching a stream like this that had so many technical issues. So thank you. Right, let me get another question from my list, because what have I got here? Ben Tripp says, possibly a stupid question. There is no such thing, Ben. Don't ever say that. Definitely not a stupid question. But I can't find the F1 regulations, and it's driving me nuts. Well, first of all, the F1 regs are all on the FIA website. You can download them for anybody who wants to go through a very long and dull reading process. Why don't F1 drivers use a heads-up display in their helmet for info purposes, or voice control for various engine modes like DRS and DAS, etc.? The technology is proven in commercial vehicles. Good question. Now, when I was back at McLaren, we tested some heads-up display stuff. We tested it in for the pit stop crew in the front jack man in the visor, so that he got the little lights in his head-up display. That actually worked okay. It was a bit temperamental at the time, which is why we didn't continue using it, and we ended up with a light system on the gantry which worked better. In the driver's situation, we tested, I think with Alex, tested a head-up display. He never liked it, and the reason he said he didn't like it was distracting when he's looking down the road, looking at the car, looking at where he needs to, or looking at the racetrack where he needs to go. He wants ultimate focus on the apexes or his braking points. He doesn't want to have excess information in front of him. So he wants to be able to choose the moment when he wants to look down or look at his display to take in some info or some data. He wanted to have that option to himself. He didn't want to have it constantly there in his eye line, and he found it distracting. It was also temperamental as well in the harsh environment that is a Formula One car. So that was that one. That was a head-up display. It's also not that needed because you don't need all that information all the time as a Formula One driver. You don't need to know how fast you're going. You know, you might want to glance at your gear selection number, but that's really big and bold on the screen in front of you, so you don't need to look very hard for that. And the other information is only needed really when you've got to make a change or you've got to do something. The shift lights are all there right at the top of the screen. They're almost in your eye line anyway. So there was no real advantage to a head-up display in that sense. And voice control just seemed reliable enough, particularly when you've got a screaming Formula One engine tearing away behind noise that's rushing in around a driver's helmet. To get a really clear, understandable, recognisable voice control message in that situation is very difficult. And unless it's 100% accurate and reliable, a driver still rather, for a split second when he knows he's got the moment to do it, look down, change, and then look back up again. So that's the reason. The technology is getting better and better. I'm sure it's way better than when we tested it back then, but I still don't think it's either necessary or advantageous enough, or even perhaps reliable enough in the situation that is a Formula One environment. That would be my opinion. Max Slater says Maldonado would have benefited from proximity arrows in the heads-up display. Harsh, man. Can't see halo from driver's seat. Can't see halo from driver's seat. You can see the halo from the driver's seat. I think maybe what you mean is, so you can see the halo from the driver's seat, of course, it's right in front of you. It doesn't become a big issue for a driver because the driver is very rarely looking directly straight down the road. The reality is a driver is almost always looking off to one side or another, looking at braking points or apex curbs or another car. We did some, at Sky, we did some really interesting eye tracking shots. I think it was Nico Hulkenberg, where he put some tech inside his helmet and tracked his eye movements around the lap. It was really fascinating stuff. I don't know if you saw it, but it showed that almost none of the time was he ever looking directly down the centre of the barrel. So the halo isn't really an issue in terms of vision for a driver in that sense. Sean Alder says voice control is unreliable. Yes, that's right. Don't worry, Mark, the tech has moved on a bit since your day yet. Thanks, Ray, that makes me sound really old. But I'm sure it has. Russell Durant says, hey Google, change gear. Let me see. Josh Smith says, not F1 related, but did you ever manage to get the wife to give you a haircut? Wondering what that cap's covering. She did give me a haircut, but need another one. So that is what the cap's covering. Right, let's get one more question in, and then we'll try and wrap it up at the top of the hour if that's okay with you lot. So let's lose that one and let's pick up this one from here, and this is from Remeros, who says, hi there, via the onboards from Max they're constantly instructing him to change settings. Strat 11, engine 5, mode 11, fail 11 are terms that are all used. What does all this mean? Well, those exact commands, they don't mean anything on their own. They can mean whatever the team want them to mean. So when you look at a Formula One steering wheel, and I may even have a pick here, look at that. You look at a steering wheel like that, that is Max's steering wheel, a replica of Max's steering wheel. And you look at all those buttons, each one of those buttons is configurable to do whatever you want it to do. So where the one at the moment, bottom left, says strat, that strat short for strategy, you could easily change that if you wanted to be your engine button, your engine switch, or it could be anything, so it could be any of those things. And even once you've decided what that switch is going to be for, you can then completely configure what each of the switch positions does. And that's exactly what they do. So when you say strat 5 or strat 11, it may not even be the same thing week after week, because depending on the strat particular race, strat 11 could be very different in one Grand Prix to strat 11 in another weekend, where it might mean something slightly different. And they're very much briefed on this. This is a process they all go through in advance of the Grand Prix, and they're all very much well versed on. So although it looks hugely complicated, all of these buttons at your disposal, normally a driver will only use one or two. You'll see the pit button up in the top right hand side. He doesn't have to look at that. He knows where it is. He can feel it. It's got that shroud around it. It's the outside button on his right thumb. He can just press it without even looking down. Same for the neutral button on the other side. The +10 and the +1 button you can see there, those are things that if a team asks the driver to go to switch G, or let's say they might go to switch the purple switch, and we're going to go +15 on the purple switch. He might press the purple button and then have to press +10 and then +1 5 times to get to the right menu and the right selection from that menu to go to purple +15. That sounds incredibly complicated, and it is, but there are so many variables that have to be available to a driver in any Grand Prix that they have to have that many options. And actually, it's nowhere near as complicated as you think, because a driver is very well practiced in it. He is very well educated in it. He's gone through and done his homework. He knows exactly what it is and what each button does. And so whilst you might think that's hugely complicated, you'll be looking down at the steering wheel for ages, he doesn't. He knows where the +10 button is just by feel. He knows where the +1 button is by feel. And he can easily count the number of button presses he does. So it's not quite as complicated as it first appears if you're a Formula One driver. So I think hopefully that explains some of that, in that particular settings don't mean anything on their own. They mean whatever the team has decided they're going to mean in that particular car on that particular weekend, in conjunction with the briefing that they've had with the driver building up to that in the first place. Max Slater, you just need one button that says make the car go faster and keep it held down. I mean, yeah, they do have buttons that make the car go faster. The overtake button is exactly one of those, a driver's favourite button. Unfortunately, he can't just keep it held down because it won't last that long. But that is one of those things. When you turn things up to quali mode or party mode, as Lewis used to call it, the overtake button does exactly the same. Puts the power unit into its highest power mode. But of course, you only have very strict limits on how long you can do that for, because if you carry on using it, first of all, you'd breach the terms of your contract with your engine supplier. That's the first thing. That's why they don't do it. And secondly, it would probably go pop at some point down the line. Right, there we go. I'm going to leave it there, I think. Thank you so much, guys. I do honestly appreciate you hanging around and being so patient. When it failed last night, I felt so bad, and I went back in. I said to my wife, I said, look, I said it was probably her fault. She was watching a movie on Netflix. But she said, they must be so gutted. Has everyone left? Is everyone cross? And I said, you know what? They're not cross, because they're an amazing bunch, you lot. We've got this brilliant community, and I know that you weren't cross. You were so understanding. The messages that I all got to say, don't worry, we'll be back tomorrow night. So thank you. Totally grateful. And I apologise it's not been plain sailing tonight. It is my internet, and I'm not sure what I can do about that. It's where I live. So I don't know. I'll try and see if there's any solution to it, but there we go. But thank you very much. Again, really, really appreciate it. We will keep trying, because I do love the format. I love the engagement with you guys. So thank you. I'm going to go and grab a beer before bed, as someone has just suggested I do. Thank you. I will. Thank you very much, and I will see you all very, very soon. See you soon. Ta-da!